the first CPD to Inspire session. I'm Azim and I'll be your host for the programme. You might not always see or hear from me, but it's my responsibility to try and make all of our sessions as effective as possible. It's my job to help you become rich. This isn't the start of a pitch for a multi-level marketing scheme or a shortcut to wealth. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When I'm talking about rich, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the attributes that you need to be successful, whatever success means to you. And those attributes are rich: resilience, intelligence, creativity, and hunger. Every CPD to Inspire session will support you to become richer in at least one of those 4 areas. The magic is that we'll help you to see that those 4 areas are complementary, increase one, and your capability in the other areas will grow as well. It's going to be a bit like an exercise program. We'll focus on one specific area each event, but it'll still be a full body workout. Today's session is a taster of what we have to offer. Enough of the fluff, let's get cracking. Today's session is brought to you by the letter I for intelligence. But what is intelligence? It can be measured in many different and often pretty meaningless ways. After all, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. That's a famous Einstein quote. Or is it? It's never been proven that he did say this, and researchers doubt that he ever did. But it's still a very good point. So there's some learned knowledge for you, which is the first of the 5 components of intelligence. Learned knowledge is about much more than how well you did at school, and judging someone by their grades is a pretty terrible measure of a person's ability, especially when you realise that the average person in the UK has the reading ability expected of a 9-year-old. To put that into a little bit of context, The Sun has a reading age of 8, and The Guardian has a reading age of 14. And I'll put a link to where you can check the reading age of your organisation's content in the resource pack for this session. For Tales to Inspire, it's something that we need to have a look at. I did a little bit of testing earlier, and our blogs and our posts are coming out at a reading age of about 12 to 14. So it could be difficult for some people to understand that content, but we sometimes we feel that we have to use fancy words and fancy language to make ourselves feel more professional, but that's not necessarily going to be what the majority of the population can benefit from. It just might not be able to follow the flow, or however. Learn knowledge isn't about your academic or professional qualifications, unless they're vocational or on-the-job qualifications, things like apprenticeships, but we'll leave them to one side for a minute. But this whole concept of grades not really being a true reflection of someone's full intelligence, that's how we end up with people who are extremely well qualified, very competent at their jobs, but they can't seem to figure out how to work the indicators on their big shiny cars. And with the right guidance, people who weren't served well enough by formal education can have the same goals and achieve exactly the same as anyone else. Learned knowledge is also about the things you pick up along the way from other people in your work and in your professional life. So that depends almost entirely on individual experiences, and it's important to understand this. We shouldn't just assume that everyone has had the same experiences that we have had. These can be things like cultural norms, or they can be practical skills. People can't know what they haven't been taught. And don't assume that just because you've been taught something, somebody else has. Now, there are 4 other components to intelligence, and they all relate to each other. A bit like the 4 elements of R.I.C.H: resilience, intelligence, creativity, and hunger. There's not a test coming for you at the end, but I thought I'd remind you of that. Within these 5 components of intelligence, you've got 2 very similar elements: logic and reasoning. So logic is about sense. Is something plausible? Is it possible? And reasoning is your ability to process different logics and identify the logic that is most valid. So it's that simple thing. You've got 2 or 3 different possible outcomes and you work out what is the most likely outcome. But where there isn't enough data, either available or in a format that people can understand, people will naturally reach conclusions that may seem logical, but they're actually emotionally driven. So in my experience, this happens a lot with optimistic people. They've got a natural tendency to downplay the possibility of their logic or reasoning being flawed, which reduces their perception of hazards and risks. A little bit of a health and safety intermission. There is a difference between hazards and risks. So really simply, hazards are things that could cause harm and risks are things that are likely to cause harm. So there's another bit of learned knowledge for you. Now, for me, I definitely find that hope for the best, plan for the worst works well for me. Successful people with a track record of getting things right are most at risk from flawed logic and reasoning. They're not necessarily more likely than anyone else to have flawed logic and reasoning unless they let confidence become arrogance. It's because of the 4th component of intelligence, and that's decision making. In a professional setting, the more successful you are, the more responsibility you have, which means more can go wrong if your decision making is poor. And I've got to be honest, it's probably the component of intelligence that I'm weakest in. I don't make that many truly bad decisions. I've had my moments, but I don't regret anything. But I just quite often will find myself making a decision to overthink. And the reason why I do that, that's between my closest friends and my therapist. But how I overcome that is by delegating. So I outsource some of my decision making, I collaborate, I bounce ideas off other people, I let my logic and reasoning be challenged, and then I make a decision. So my bad decisions have been where I haven't followed that process. If I had, I might have known that my learned knowledge was insufficient. And it doesn't matter how sound your logic is, if you're working with incomplete knowledge, your reasoning might not hold. And another thing to just watch out for is a thing called hindsight bias. So this is where we look back at decisions we've made after they've happened, and we get upset by the possibility of what could have been. And that can be a barrier to us looking back into our decisions and seeing where things have gone wrong. But a lot of the time, what could have been couldn't have been because you didn't know what you know now. So it's really, really important, particularly in work when things have gone wrong, to just look back and see, well, where did it go wrong? You might have heard this as lessons learned, or something like that, or reviewing a project, but it's really, really important, especially when things have gone wrong, so you can learn from that and try and avoid repeating the same mistakes. But you use all of what you've learned to demonstrate the 5th and final component of intelligence, and that's knowledge application. In other words, putting it all together and showing what you can do. So really quick recap for you. The I in R.I.C.H stands for intelligence, and there are 5 main components of intelligence: learned knowledge, logic, reasoning, decision making, and knowledge application. So now that you know that, what can you do with it? Well, whatever you want, really. That depends on your goals. I'm not going to go into that now, but don't worry, we'll put in some resources for goal setting in the resource pack for the session. But I think the best thing you can do with this new learned knowledge that you've had from me is to think about something that you want to get better at, and think about your knowledge application. What will be better, easier, or maybe quicker to do once you've got this new knowledge? So vocational training, I mentioned this before, that's things like apprenticeships, and also workplace coaching can be a great way of improving all 5 components of intelligence together. But coaching is a skill, and that requires an additional learned knowledge. which is the ability to transfer knowledge that the recipient can apply quickly. It's very different, being a teacher or a uni lecturer in a subject like English literature or, one of the humanities, where you're just, you are generally teaching people things for the sake of learned knowledge. There's not really a clear application. Coaching is different in that you want to show somebody how to do it. So you've probably heard about quiet quitting, this kind of concept of doing the bare minimum at work to keep you out of trouble. I've got a problem with that concept in the first place. Wages lag behind productivity increases. You should just naturally get better at your job the more that you do it. But your pay doesn't keep up with that. So doing what you're paid for feels like a pretty reasonable concept to me. But you can avoid that problem entirely by finding learning opportunities that improve your own productivity. Grow the skills that you need to do more in less time. The more that we all do this sooner, the quicker we can all get to a 4-day week. So how can you get these skills? Well, joining the CPD to Inspire program is one way. Our next event is on October the 20th. There'll be some links somewhere near this video for where you can get more information and sign up. But if you want to learn about accessibility, then you definitely need to be there. I'll be talking about what the law says about reasonable adjustments and whether the social model of disability is more useful for workplaces and community organisations. And I'm also going to show you how accessible design should and can be aesthetically pleasing or pretty. Then we'll be having a panel discussion with two amazing, inspiring people, Sandy Roberts and Isaac Harvey. They're going to be sharing their lived experience with disabilities, particularly some of the things that we can all do to stop disabling and start enabling people. After that, we'll be hosting monthly events with more amazing learning opportunities with special guests. There are also so many free ways that you can develop your intelligence components. You can subscribe to the CPD to Inspire Substack. We'll send you a free fortnightly email with content to make you more rich. YouTube has got a wealth of information, but do be careful with opinions being presented as facts that match your own confirmation bias. So I generally use YouTube for how-to guides. There's pretty much always something, especially for tech issues. Anything goes wrong with the computer, phone, there'll be a how-to guide on YouTube. Just watch it and you'll be able to sort the problem out. I do also use YouTube and other video on demand platforms to teach me something else, which is how to be wrong. So when I was a fresh graduate, I had what I can now, with hindsight, see as a problem with, let's call it overconfidence. So my logic and reasoning were fine and my academic records were brilliant, but I didn't have enough learned knowledge to work out that, when an employer says, we want to hear your ideas, they actually mean we want to hear ideas that don't make the existing way of doing things look stupid. So not knowing that meant my reasoning and decision making was questionable. Sometimes it paid off, but when it didn't, I really, really annoyed people. So coaching or mentoring would definitely have helped me in my early career. As I said earlier, I don't regret anything. But one of the things that helped me learn to be wrong was watching documentaries about things I knew nothing or very little about and didn't really care about. Some stuff like big construction projects, ancient history. One of my guilty pleasures is The Factory with Greg Wallace, where he just goes into a factory and shows you how stuff's produced. It's useless, but it's amazing because you realize there's so much that you don't know, and you also think about how many assumptions you've made about how things really work based on incomplete information. And just getting yourself in that zone where it's psychologically safe for you to recognize that you don't have all the answers all the time, and you've probably just joined some dots that that don't actually connect, or you've created the wrong picture. But identifying that is a strength. It's part of emotional intelligence. And we'll be touching on that in November's CPD to Inspire session. Other free ways of improving your richness is following experts in your professional world on social media. That can just drip feed learned knowledge into your mind. Just make sure that they're actually experts. And as you build your logic and reasoning skills, you'll be able to spot the people who know what they're talking about. And you can also find a range of free and paid for online courses from websites like Coursera, Skillshare, and FutureLearn. So there's so much more to the internet than memes, although some of those can be great at helping you become rich as well. And I've got one last hack for you. If you work with other people, then you might not want to focus on how rich you are individually, but where you are collectively. Resilience is a great example of this. You can diffuse or spread resilience through an organization by sharing the bad. That can be bad times emotionally or professionally. So I once worked for a small family firm, and the family patriarch, he was the managing director. He was an old guy into his 70s, and the company had been going like forever. And that might seem like an environment where they could justify the arrogance. But our managing director, he wasn't that person. He tried his best to make sure that we didn't have to be resilient, or as resilient as he'd had to be. So he shared his learned knowledge generously. Just about every situation we could face, he'd been through as well. And he'd made mistakes, some of them spectacular, some of them easily fixed. That gave us a lot of freedom. So the work that we did was more art than science. And he showed us that it was okay to get things wrong. And even when we thought we knew better, and would go and make the mistakes that he'd warned us about, he'd sigh like a disappointed dad, and then he'd get to work helping us fix it. And when it was all said and done, he'd get a pat on the back. And he was also happy to learn from us. Some of the things, modern technology, new systems, just went over his head. So he would just let us take care of those things for him. And when that happens, everyone's hunger grows. You become more creative. Your logic, reasoning, and knowledge application, as well as your decision-making, improve. And we understand that getting it wrong is a vital part of getting rich. So I hope to see you live in October for our next CPD to Inspire event. You can also sign up to receive the recording of that session. If you can't make it live, we won't be posting that full session in public. So the only way to see it all is to register. And if you want to talk to me about how you can join the CPD to Inspire program as an individual or an organization, just ping me an email to azim@talestoinspire.com here. If you've got any questions or comments about this workshop, leave them down below or contact me directly. And if you've enjoyed or just found this useful, then please share this video with anyone else who you think might value it. Thanks for watching and take care.